Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Michael Moore. I work with a company called DFM Data to help standardize some of the processes to make digital freight matching a lot better, to make what we call the TUID a accepted and realized principle in the shipping industry. And as one of my friends said, boy, if you guys are successful, we won't have another logistics problem. And today we're going to be hosted and work with my associate, Bill, who he actually serves as the chairperson of the TUID working group, which has been working to look at standards, to look at governance, to look at information, to look at ways to get things better. And of course, today we have a couple of industry experts with us. One of those you'll meet in a moment. I'm going to allow Bill to introduce them and also tell you a little bit more about the working group he's working with. So, Bill, please take it away.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate being here with a fine group of folks. Michael Moore, and I want to introduce Mariah Hay. She's a talented influencer that pertains to how companies should be more ethical. I had the privilege of meeting her and seeing her conference at the GRID event where we had hundreds and hundreds of spectators. And I've actually shared some of the feedback that she gave at that conference. Wonderful contact, and we're so happy to have her with us. Mariah, you want to give a little bit of feedback about your background?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. So I've got over 2 decades of experience in the software tech space, specifically software as a service. And in the time that I've spent putting together teams to create the best software products, I have thought a lot about how we can be ethical and how we do that, both in how we approach the skills that we bring to the table when we put teams together, companies, how they think about the standards they need to hold themselves to, and even within the software industry itself, how we might start to take a page out of the book of companies like that exist in the medical, legal, and structural engineering professions so that we can start to think about ethical standards that we can set ourselves. So I think a highly relevant topic to thinking about TUID and digital freight matching.
Thank you, Mariah. One of the things that we're going to be addressing here that pertains to the spot market and how our loads are currently not identified until booking has occurred. We're going to be discussing a little bit on this problem of phantom loads or ghost loads. But ghost loads in the spot market. Phantom loads occur when a shipper or broker puts load postings out with multiple intermediaries and digital freight management systems. And some of them would be unbeknown to the shipper. They get reposted as these loads as notices in more places. The result is many postings of the same load when the load is ultimately booked. Some of these postings remain in the system. So that's why we say it's like a phantom load. And that's part of an issue that makes it very hard for them, if you're a shipper or broker and you want to be diligent, to say what is in your pipeline, what is going to be happening. You want to chime in here a little bit, Michael?
Yeah, because I think the audience is going to be hearing this, and of course we all have a standardization of terms, but boy, I like your thing about phantom loads and ghost loads. That really just drives up everybody's cost and wastes a lot of time, doesn't it?
Yeah, most definitely. And the problem is it can be easily solved with an industry-wide ID system that follows a standard form with a unique ID that shippers can self-generate and apply to intended prior negotiations between shippers and brokers.
Well, that gives every physical load, I'm hearing you say, is really a unique identifier.
And it's a commitment to send the ID to the intended recipient, created so that the recipient knows when it comes in, regardless of the intermediary arrangements, and a repository of that record for reposting the IDs that were legitimately created. Very good.
So I'm assuming that some of these items give us the ability to kind of schedule and have things automatically die or cease to be active, as well as, of course, as you mentioned, it's originated by the shipper. And of course, it has a termination or a culmination or a maturity when the item is actually delivered and the shipment and the payment and the collection are complete. Is that correct?
That is correct. while simple, it's a big challenge for many companies in an industry that is competitive. They're worried about competitive knowledge being stolen, and they're suspicious of other firms' motives. And it's going to help better identify who your customer that you're dealing with because of how this has been set up through ECMA.
And put some honesty and ethics back into the system. That cue up a softball there for you.
Mariah, take it away on the ethics.
100%. So, ethically speaking, I think that I love the direction that you're going in with the TUID. I think the problem of the phantom loads and the double brokering and driving up cost, everybody loses. And I think that software companies and the ones that are creating software for the digital freight matching, they need to take a page out of the code of ethics books that, industries like medical, legal, reporting, structural engineering, all of these different industry groups have ethical codes. And while the applications of ethical codes, and just to kind of set the record straight, ethics are something that a group of people all agree is the right thing to do. It's different than legal. It's not necessarily codified, but it's kind of like in the medical industry, doctors all agree to share information with each other because it creates better outcomes for the patients, those kinds of standards. All of these different industries, they have similar themes such as public safety, performing only in areas of confidence, being truthful in public statements, the whole phantom double shipping, double brokering. It's not quite accurate, maybe bordering on not being truthful, just by having all that junk data in the system. Avoiding deceptive acts and conducting business in a responsible way. These are all things that I think digital freight matching software companies could really benefit from starting to identify and move towards, which is why I love the TUID.
I agree, Mariah, because it basically is building greater trust with stakeholders, such as the employees, the supply chain partners that are in the network, and it enables an organization to reallocate investment of oversight and monitoring other parts of their business. So you're not tied up chasing all this phantom data that's a bunch of junk.
I was going to just kind of quantify, because that opened a great idea thought for me and probably people listening to this podcast. There are thousands, if not maybe 100,000 people working in this brokering marketplace, and there are, if I remember the number, there's something like 3 million trucks on our roads. And we've got trucks, we got trailers, we got brokers, we got phantom loads, we got a lot of smoke and mirrors. Talk about how you feel this, medical is a defined licensed arena. But when you talk about freight brokering, there's just, this thing is so massive. How in the world was a group agree on something like this to have a TUID? It sounds like a great idea.
I think that's the right place to start. I think it's agreeing, the digital freight matching software companies and the people that are their customers, people are going to start putting their foot down eventually. And it's better for an industry group to get ahead of it. Because, you and I, we don't want to be the world to be a place where companies make money off negligent or deceptive acts. And history always has proven that companies that operate based on higher ethical standards, they have greater success, their customers have greater success, their employees are usually treated better, the communities they operate in and thrive. Like a rising tide lifts all ships here. And so I think that if the leadership thought of TUID is a great step in that direction. And I would encourage companies that are more forward thinking in digital freight matching to really rise to the challenge, because there's an opportunity to set the standards here. And if you become that standard bearer, that actually holds a lot of weight with customers and even the success of your platform.
It's amazing when you think about the working group that you've been chairing now for what, how many months has this, with TUID been working? Over a year?
7 months. And we are looking to beta test more companies to be added for this project that we're in.
You've done a great job at bringing together some industry experts to talk about this. As you said, on about every 2 weeks, you spend about an hour together. I'm sure there's been some great ahas in that process. But as an outside the industry person who really didn't do anything other than watch a bunch of trucks get in my way on highways for a while, I started thinking about it when I started looking at who in the world would begin to help enforce something like this? How would it work with the shipping and the maritime and the ocean freight and the transshipping and the, oh my gosh, there's just so many moving parts to this. Where have you found, and Mariah, you may want to address this too, how would a group this large begin to seriously be coordinated, control, self-police, and make ethics a part of everyday business?
Michael, it encompasses a wide group of people to basically accept a process that can be controlled around multiple vertical markets, and having ISO 8000 here, because it's dealing with the system data, is going to be a complement, because it's going to be approved via ECMA. So Mariah, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think that is a great place to start. Change can come from two places. You can kind of work from the top down to try to get a good idea implemented across a large group. And then you can also do a bottoms up. And I'd like to use the example from our friends in the auto industry. I think back before seatbelts were a standard appliance on vehicles, I believe it was Volvo started putting them in the vehicles for additional safety as kind of a differentiator. Hey, we'll keep you from dying and going through the windshield. And, back then reporters were capturing these awful images of people that had gone through windshields and accidents, and it's preventable deaths. And so, Volvo took up that mantle and said, well, we're going to make it standard in every automobile, and not all the auto manufacturers are going to follow. But that's working from the bottom up, but from the top down, then, government, which in a large part plays a role in general welfare and safety of the population, said, what they're doing is a pretty good idea and it's saving lives. And so we should probably make this a standard thing within the automotive industry. And so, of course, you have folks that always will disagree with different policy decisions, but by and large, this was a wildly popularly supported move, and all the auto manufacturers followed the rules and regulations that were put in place by, working with Washington to try to establish some kind of standard. And now we've got greater safety today. And I can see the same thing working, if there are folks out there listening that work with the digital freight matching software, starting to follow some kind of standard like this as being setting the stage. Could there be a greater potential for the industry in order to be able to make this something that everybody can follow?
I agree.
I love that. I love that Volvo example. Volvo was already the quote safest car in the world, the safest car in America, and they added to the seat belts. And of course, there were no standards for seat belts. And so one of the things with the TUID group, and I know it's important, is we have to have, and you mentioned the generated number, which tells us all the data we need to know about a transmission or a shipment until it's finished, completed, billed, and paid, is such a great tool. But it's a standard that becomes voluntary. It's not a regulation yet, so we're ahead of that curve, building a standard that can be used in industry. And so if we have some government agencies, and you mentioned ECMA, I guess they're important. I think the Maritime Commission is important. I certainly know the Department of Commerce is important, but we're really talking about a worldwide principle to take care of transoceanic shipping, to take care of air freight. And so talk to us, Bill, from your perspective about some of these other acronyms and groups that are going to really make this possible, in case we have some uninformed.
ISO 8000 is what we're looking to define in this sector itself. So I hope that helps.
What have you seen in terms of, you mentioned engineers, you mentioned medical, you mentioned attorneys. I think a lot of people now are trying to put some more legality into the process. And, we have an opportunity. We could probably going to begin to develop more podcasts which are really focused on individual subject matter items, so people can almost use this like a table of contents. What do you think?
I love the sound of that. You've seen other similar things happen with other parts of software. For example, how we all when we are pushing shopping carts, we enjoy the ramps that are used for folks that have mobility needs, but it also benefits us that might be pushing something on wheels. There are similar things that have come into play in the last decade within the software industry. And it started with a group of folks that said, we can do better for folks that might have visual impairment or other needs within software. We call it accessibility needs. And so very much like the group that kind of governs accessibility started with, hey, this is a great idea. And then it started to gain acceptance. Now it's kind of the standard within across different software companies. And it doesn't really matter which one it is. If you're using a screen, being able to navigate with a keyboard, use a screen reader, all of those things. And so great ideas like this can really start to take off, but it does take a group of folks to be able to espouse them. And the more you can bring awareness to this, the folks that are actually creating the digital freight matching products, so the engineers and designers, if they're aware of this, they'd probably go, we're going to start incorporating this into our designs and into our data models and into the software architecture. Y'all are making it easy on your side with how you're thinking about APIs and data modeling. You're going to make it easy for them to start to adopt it. So the more kind of connection and thought leadership you can do through this podcast and other mechanisms, I think you can gain a lot of traction.
Well, you mentioned your background coming from the software as a service industry. That's an interesting path. APIs make things somewhat simpler, but they don't actually level the playing field all the way. So if you would think, help us think through that a little bit, and I think it will become a separate podcast, and I look forward to having you in that process. But do you think you want to become part of the leading new trend and save us some time, effort, money? And you know what? It's amazing. It's amazing. If I'm learning some of this stuff today for the first time, I heard that we were at 5 years ago, pre-COVID, we had about 200 people who were actually trying to do digital freight matching. That we've gone from about 200 freight matching companies now to over 1,200 digital freight matching companies, and all those salespeople and all those routes and all that phantom data and everything is just snowballing. So literally, it becomes much more important for us now to have standards that might help us hold down some of these costs. Because I did hear the president talk about inflation, and we've all talked about a logistics problem which nobody seems to be able to easily solve. And there's still ships waiting to be unloaded, and I don't think we know what's on some of those ships anymore because it's just so crazy out there in the marketplace. I think companies are really struggling from a manufacturing standpoint, from a warehousing standpoint, from a shipping standpoint. Wouldn't it be so much simpler if literally every pallet had a unique identifier that could be tracked and audited and completed and delivered and billed and paid? It might impact our overall cost, and Lord, it might even slow down inflation just a little bit. So we probably ought to all focus on all those numbers and get a little bit more smart about what's really happening in the marketplace and what opportunities we have for standards before we have to worry about regulations. Does that make sense?
I agree, Michael, because it's a highly fragmented market that is very, very confusing. Because what's exacerbated the problem too with COVID, that tendency of not trusting what you do have, and basically because the technology is there, but it's not being uniformly applied. What do you think, Mariah?
Oh, I think that you're both making excellent points. And it's interesting because if you listen to the political discourse about inflation, nobody is talking about some of the things that are influencing it like this. If you have, an industry that is rapidly expanding, the 200 to 1,200 companies within a 5-year period that are just focused on creating digital freight matching platforms that scramble to create digital products without kind of the care and feeding of your underlying ethics of how it operates, that in and of itself is adding fuel to the inflation fire. And so we have to, from an ethics standpoint, nobody wants inflation to keep going like it's going. And so we need to rein in some of these practices of the phantom double brokering and that's this driving up costs, wasting time, and undermining safety even. So I love that you're bringing that up because you make a great point, and it hurts everybody. that has to pay consumer goods prices. It hurts people that are selling, it hurts the people that are buying, your everyday consumer. And so digital freight matching is a bigger problem than just the people that are trying to move freight. It impacts all of us.
I agree.
Wow. I think we've covered quite a few points today, and I think I know that my head has gotten some new data points. I even learned a couple of abbreviations, and I thought APIs were supposed to make everything so simple. I just thought everybody was talking the same language. I must have missed it somewhere in translation.
ISO 8000, you don't hear too much about. Everyone knows ISO 9000. Are you certified? Are you a worldwide shipper? Because that deals with standards, procedures, SOPs. But 8000 is something that I believe is going to be growing tremendously, because this can be an asset to us to address this problem.
Wow.
We want to have a little bit of a wrap up, and we're going to lead off with Michael Moore, and then closing will be with Mariah Hay. Take it away, Michael.
Well, Bill, thank you. You've done a great job as you've been leading this TUID group over the last 7 months to pull some of this data and information together. But Mariah, you've done a great job to show us what the ethics process in an industry that doesn't have sometimes ethics, because we all just think things appear in boxes on our doorstep and we're happy. So thank you for being with us today, and take us home in terms of ideas of what to think for next.
Well, Bill, Michael, it was such a pleasure getting to chat with you all today. I suppose if I have one last thought for our listeners on the podcast, it's to really think about the ethical implications of the things that we build within software and our ecosystems, and how that can have a broader ranging impact, not just on our customers, but kind of everybody at large. And so I encourage folks that are building these projects and products to really understand those blind spots, not weaponize your product, really be aware of what it's doing and be really accountable for these things. There's a lot of pressure to rush to market, but you can create impacts as big as pushing inflation up within a country. So it's all on us, ethically speaking, to be a bit more careful and really support industry leaders and how they're thinking about standardizing, so we can avoid some of these pitfalls.
Thank you, Mariah. And we'll also have some links attached to this podcast for further edification for the folks that are listening to it. Wonderful,
yep.
Wonderful time.
Yeah, Bill, I appreciate that. I do really hope that we build a glossary of all these terms and phrases that we bump into, because sometimes people think they know what things mean, and sometimes they don't know the answers. So good to be with you today. This is Michael Moore coming to you from somewhere on the road in Georgia. And Bill's coming to us from somewhere in Savannah, and Mariah's just coming from the expert's chair.
Thank you, folks. Have a good afternoon. God bless.
Thank you.